Hey there, Jammers. Artistic Cranberry here. This is just a quick speed paint of a piece from my Redbubble shop called The Lady of the Lake. The link is in the description below, so let's jump right in. Right here, you can see I'm using a reference for this piece. I just use Google image search because I don't draw this position very often, so I'm not comfortable with it. So I wanted to make sure I had my shapes right. I'm just in my sketching and like blocking phase, just roughing in all my shapes, making sure everything's where I want it to be. And you'll notice I keep resizing the piece because I want it to be fairly small. I'm going to make it a print, like a repeating pattern at the end, so I don't want it to take up the whole page. So the color I'm using here isn't just like a straight black, it's generally called rich black. So when you're looking at your color picker, there's a part of the color code that's labeled CMYK. You can put numbers in there from 0 to 100. Here's the color code for rich black. It says 60, 40, 40, 100, but I generally use 40, 40, 40, 100 just because I like the way that looks a little better, but you can use whatever you like. I like to use rich black instead of just the plain RGB black because whenever you're making something that's going to be printed and moved to the physical world rather than just on a screen, um, just a straight neutral black generally looks really flat. Using a rich black gives you a fuller color when it's used for printing. However, my canvas is not in CMYK color mode. It is in RGB color mode, so I can save it as a transparent PNG file. Right here, I'm selecting a bright red color because I'm going to go in and do some redlining. So what redlining is you take the color red over other colors, or if what you're doing is like a mostly like reddish orange piece, you can use like a cool tone color like a blue or a green. But you take the color and you just redline over your whatever it is you're trying to trace. I did this on the same layer, just on a lower opacity, um, just because I didn't want to make another layer. But what I'm doing is I'm going over the pieces I already have in place and using those structural elements as guidelines, and I'm just adding more detail. So like I tapered in the handle of the sword. I've added this decorative piece on the hilt. I'm creating this swoopy bar for the hilt. I do this a lot in my redlining phase, where when I want to have something in the end result look somewhat symmetrical, I just copy, paste it, and flip it to the other side. So this isn't my final lining, so when I do my final lining over it, it's not perfectly symmetrical. It looks a little more natural, but it's still pretty close. What I'm doing is using the straight line tool. So I believe you use your brush tool, and once you click down to start your brush tool, I'm pretty sure you press shift, and then you can create a straight line, and then I just copied it and used it on the other side. And then I'm going to create the point of the sword, make sure that's in there how I want it. And then next, I believe I'm making a new layer, and I'm going back to that rich black color, and I'm going to do my final lining over the whole piece. So when you're doing your final line art, it's important to make sure you turn on your smoothing setting. So if you go at the top of your toolbar when you have the brush tool open, there's an option that says smoothing. I usually put on 30% smoothing because anything more than that, kind of your lines don't end up where you want them to be. But you want to have some smoothing on just because naturally when you're working on a screen, your line ends up really like wobbly. When you turn on smoothing, it gets rid of some of that shakiness and the line ends up straight. Well, straighter. Another really important thing when you're doing your final line art is you want to make sure that at least the outside of your entire drawing, all the lines are closed and connected, because when you do your coloring, you want to be able to create a clipping mask. And how you create a clipping mask is you're going to take the magic wand and you're going to select the area outside of your drawing, and then you right click on your selection and you press select inverse. Then you make a new layer and put it under your line art layer with that selection still on it. And you're going to pick a color. So if you have intentions of making a cool tone piece, you're going to fill it with a red color like I'm going to. And then if you're going to make a warmer tone piece, you want to use like a blue or a green. Or if you want it to be fairly neutral, you can use like a gray tone. But you fill that area you have selected underneath your line art, and then you're going to make a new layer uh, above that fill selection. You right click on this layer and you say create clicking mask on the options. Create clipping mask, sorry. And when you create that clipping mask, it puts it over that fill layer so you can't draw or color anywhere outside of it. And then you're going to color in on that clipping mask layer. And what I'm doing right here in the line art is I'm adding in, I wanted just like this impression of a lake underneath the arm, just so you could really tell that this was supposed to be the Lady of the Lake. I wanted to create a nice shape with a little bit of that waterfall aspect. And here I am creating my clipping mask, and you'll see that I mess up and don't do the select inverse step, and now I have filled the correct spot. And if you'll look, when I go and I start coloring this piece, I'm scribbling all over, and it's not going outside the lines. So for coloring the piece, I'm doing my color blocking right now. I picked a cool tone silver for the actual blade. The hilt I'm going to do in a bronze color, so I picked that like orangey brown. Uh, a skin tone color for the arm, and then I wanted the lake to look kind of like it's on a misty day. So I did a greenish gray color. And in here, I'm just making sure I've got the details correct for all my color blocking and have it all filled in. I'm going to color in that detail piece. That gemstone is going to be green. Now I'm going to go in with a darker green, and I'm going to create a sleeve on the Lady of the Lake's arm. I did this on purpose. I left this lineless on the actual line art because I wanted it to look a little bit more subtle on the hand. I'm using the same cool tone silver I use in the blade for the embroidery on the dress. And then I should be going in after the embroidery to begin my shading. If you want a more in-depth look at my shading process, my previous video doesn't have a voiceover, but it's a lot more slowed down and it's just focusing on my shading process. Normally what I do is I put my color down on a clipping mask above my initial color base, and then I blend out the color and put more color in and put my highlights and shadows, and I use a blending tool to blend it out. But since this is going to be smaller scale for the repeating print, I'm just doing a more cel-shaded look, so I'm not blending these pieces out, so that when it's zoomed out and on that smaller scale, you can read that the shadows are still there from a distance and the highlights are still there. This highlight on the sword I'm going to go back and change later, but I'm doing this cel-shaded look because on smaller objects, if you blend out the shadow too much, it becomes really too subtle to be able to see from a distance. It's similar to kind of when you're drawing a video game sprite. A lot of times you'll use like pixel or cel shading. Alright. Here I'm coloring in the bronze part. When you're doing a bronze, you want to stick in like orangey brown colors for your highlights and your shadows so that it looks more like the metal tone. If you're doing a gold, your shadows you actually want to lean a little bit of a green color with. And there I've fixed the highlight on the sword. And I think I'm going to go in and do the shading on this gemstone. When you're doing a transparent gemstone, your big shadow isn't going to be a solid shadow because it's transparent. So you've got your shaded edges for depth, and then I put a little bit more of that color and light coming through in the shadow because it is transparent. And then you want your bright white highlight to be on the very top. This is just basic shading on the hand, where light's hitting it, where the sleeve would be resting above it. I put this highlight in. I decided I don't like the color, and I decided I don't like that lower part of the highlight, so I'm going to go in and change that real quick. Yeah, and in a second I'll be getting rid of that lower highlight. Now I believe I'm going in and shading on the dress. For this, I did actually create that second clipping mask on top of the first one, so I could go in and do the shadows without disturbing the embroidery work I did. So I just used black and white on it, and then I lowered the opacity of that clipping mask to about 25% so that you couldn't see it as well. And then here I'm just resizing it, merging all those layers together, and then I'm going to copy it and I'm going to move it so that I have the first line of my repeating print. I'm using these guidelines to make sure everything's spaced how I want it. So like making sure that this one's going to be in the center of those two, and then putting them in between those spaces. Then you merge all those layers, and you're going to copy that layer, and you're going to put it down at the bottom, and I made 3 lines. And I'm going to fiddle with that for a bit, but that's pretty much it. I'll let you watch the rest of the video. Please like and subscribe, and have a very good day.